I'm excited to kick off this week's Road to Inspire session, all about powering up your power users. I'm joined today by Josephina, a solution deployment manager here at Docebo, as well as Ashley Jordan, a senior customer experience manager here at Docebo. To both of you, welcome to the Road to Inspire.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome everybody. Thank you guys for joining today. So as you mentioned, we're going to walk you through how to power up your power users. We're going to get into some best practices, and hopefully you'll have some key takeaways after today's presentation. We're going to break it up into two parts. We're going to do part one, part two. In part one, we're going to go over some of the basics. What are they? Touch on some of the value adds. And then Josephina is going to talk to us a little bit about some of those common power user personas as it relates to the use case. Then we'll get into a little bit of when to use it, best practices around governance, management, creation. What's the best creation method that's most scalable for your use case? And then finally, we'll touch on the power user experience in general. So just a couple of expected learning outcomes for you guys today. After this presentation, you should be able to recall when to use a power user, understand the foundations of power user management, be able to analyze your current organizational approach if you're currently doing that, and or if you're currently using another system and need to reorganize or rethink how your organization is going to approach that sort of decentralization of those tasks, how to design an effective experience for those power users, and then you should finally be able to apply some of these best practices to your use case. All right, so let's jump into it. Part one. The basics. So a power user, for some of you guys on the call who might not be familiar or not using the app, is a type of admin in the system, not a super admin, not a learner. It's kind of somewhere in between, right? So you designate them through their level, and they have a specific set of defined users, defined content, and things we call assignments, right? The way that this works in Docebo is you have a level that you change a power user, but you also have this concept of a profile. Now, the profile, again, is going to be that set of assignments, set of permissions, locations, etc. And actually, we've had a recent enhancement to our power user app where you can associate more than one profile to a single power user. So within that same vein, kind of speaking to the enhancements piece of it, we actually did just go through a recent enhancement of this app. First and foremost, if you guys have been using it, the first thing you'll notice is it has an updated interface, it's redesigned. And then there is a functionality that I mentioned is that you can have you can associate more than one of those profiles to a single user or power user, which means that you can really create profiles that are purely permission-based. All right, so we're going to get into a little bit of some of the value adds. So what can power users do for your learning program? First and foremost, this is a great way to sort of decentralize a lot of those administrative tasks that you have in the system. It allows you to delegate those permission sets to individuals who actually need to manage those directly, right? So in that sense, you're empowering your team members to take control of those tasks and those needs that they need to oversee directly. And this can break down potential silos or bottlenecks as well, which of course we all want to avoid, right? We want to give the power to the people who are actually overseeing that area. Accessibility, this is a huge one. So the LMS is flexible enough that you can create different experiences for these power users that provides an immediate point of need for these folks, right? For example, if you have a notification that can get sent to a power user that it reminds them that there's some associated action that they need to take based on some learner action, right? Some learner took an action and they oversee that learner and there's an associated action item. So speaking of engagement, using those notifications is a really great way. Also really easy, really accessible, right? All that to say that is going to save you time down the road, right? Super admin resources are limited. Resources in general are finite, right? So we need to invest that time up front to configure those profiles, get that framework in place so that downstream you can also save time, right? So think of your future self, think of your future team, right? You might have new people join as well. You'll think yourself down the road as you have an influx of people or your team changes, right? You already have that framework in place. So easy to scale. It allows you to build unique experiences, right? So users come to the system with different purposes. One size definitely doesn't fit all in the LMS world, right? So you need to consider, who is that audience? What is their level of technology proficiency? Are they experienced using an LMS? Have they never used an LMS before, right? You need to design around that need. You can provide a unique landing page for those people. And again, direct them to the immediate point of need. Maybe that looks like a custom content box, which is all that to say a call to action button that you can place on their dashboard. And we'll get into a little bit more of the learning experience design portion of it towards the end of the presentation today. So all this to say, this is a really great way to scale your e-learning program by compartmentalizing and delegating those responsibilities, right? And again, as new audiences join your program, this could be new audiences that you are serving through the LMS and or new team members. You have that same framework in place where you're able to decentralize those tasks, again, putting the power in the hands of the people that are actually overseeing those audiences.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashley. So we went through and really learned how or what power users are and how they best help you. But let's take it a little bit further and talk about what these personas can really look like in your organization. And so the first thing that comes to mind when we think about an internal use case where you're training your employees is oftentimes a manager. And we already saw in our poll, it looks like about half of you guys are using power users in tandem with my teams. And we do this oftentimes to really expand out the administrative abilities that we're giving our managers. And typically this may look like something like, having better visibility on your team, enrolling your team into courses that are applicable for that team specifically, as well as just getting a better insight in how the team is doing as a whole. So all of these things are what a power user profile can do and give your manager, right? This also expands and can be seen with something like an instructional designer persona, where oftentimes we may have content coming in from different sources. And as an LMS admin, we're struggling to bring it all from everywhere. And it can really be beneficial to have that power user persona of an instructional designer, give them the ability to actually come into the LMS, upload the content they have, and really design the courses, the live sessions that you're hosting. All of this is something that a power user can do, right? So fantastic for you as an admin, because you don't have to worry so much about the building of the courses, because you can actually give that power to like the subject matter experts to go in and do directly. So it really is a win-win on both sides. And we also see that, we continue to see that with something like, human resources, where oftentimes we are having compliance courses that we do periodically, and frequently you do experience where you have to provide reporting and you have to ensure that certain courses are completed, taken on time. And that's when that reporting becomes super important, and directly allowing someone, from HR to come in, have access to the reports, have full visibility of how users are interacting with those compliance courses can also be super helpful. The time saving, again, is just putting that administrative ability directly in the hands of the people that need that data. So those were some common, internal power user personas, and we do still see some external power user personas that happen across the board. And you may see that the abilities that we provide these power users are typically common, where we're looking at reports, course management, user management. But we oftentimes, when we have that external use case where you may be training your own clients, it may be really helpful to have someone from the client side be a power user as an admin of their own people, managing their training, having a direct view of the reports and how their team is doing, how their team is interacting with the LMS. So that firsthand view, again, is not only a time saver, but it's a huge value add for that client team, right? Same thing may happen with the partners and with, for example, you may have distribution partners, and training and enablement, super important. And we really want to make sure that access to certain courses isn't ever delayed. And when you are managing let's say a user base that's really decentralized. We can see that as well when we have maybe franchise or retail models where users maybe spread across many, many different locations. It is tough to be that one LMS admin who's in charge of the training for, let's see, many countries, many states with many different regulations. And so having the ability to have an admin who can not only oversee just their region, but the fact that they, as an admin, only see that region and are only limited to the things that they need keeps this power user, functionality really safe and extremely valuable functionality for you as an admin who is overall in charge of the entire platform, right? All right, so what I want to show you guys is when we look at the platform, we talk about these different personas and they probably need different permissions. Like a manager is going to need to see and do a lot of many different things than something like an instructional designer. So in this scenario, we're seeing on the left, this is the area where we may pick different levels of the platform or parts of the platform that we're going to give the power user access to. In this scenario, someone like a manager may be viewing, editing users, just making sure that their team, their role, everything is up to date and they're seeing the courses that they need. Maybe off the fly, someone needs to be enabled on a certain topic. Your manager directly has the access to roll that or send that enrollment out and have great visibility on reports for their entire team. So this is a pretty complete profile for a manager. Now, with it being fully customizable, this is up to your discretion of, how far you want to take these permissions. Whether it is just something to enhance the reporting for a manager, or we do want to make sure that they, can even enroll their users into courses. So another example we're looking at is that instructional designer I mentioned. Like I said, they're going to see very different things. Maybe enrollments and reports for them aren't so important than it is to create the courses, create that learning experience through the editing of catalogs, learning plans, even certificates. And a lot of these, if you've been an admin in the system, you know that it does take some time to configure everything. And so having this someone like an instructional designer, for example, on your team and just with the permissions that they need to help you configure things is such a time saver, right? So again, many, many different options to explore, all fully customizable from the areas available. All right, so what we're going to do is hop into part 2, and I'll hand it back over to Ashley.
All right. As I mentioned before, part 2, now we're going to get into some of that governance, planning, management, creation best practices, so you guys can figure out, what is the most scalable way for your use case. Obligatory Spider-Man quote: with great power, of course, comes great responsibility. And yes, we know this was Uncle Ben, not Spider-Man himself, who said that. But it is a really important note. Of course, you give permissions to someone, they have certain power over the system, right? So it is so important to define the rules of engagement. So let's jump into some of the best practices that you should keep in mind, either as you're going and planning and if you're in that initial phase, and or if you're currently using it, right? It's never too late to have that sort of governance conversation. So when we think of governance planning, this is going to be your who, what, why, right? Who is your audience? What actors are going to be responsible for overseeing those administrative tasks to support those people, right? What do these power users need to be able to know or do? What do they need access to? Who do they need access to, right? And more importantly, understand the why, right? This is that rationale behind creating each profile. And this will largely form sort of the framework and basis that that should be in place at this stage, that again will help you later down the road in terms of scaling if you have new audiences that you need to capture, and or if you actually grow your L&D or your admin team, right? Obviously, the next step is going to be configuration and implementation. This will consist of actually creating those profiles, changing the levels, and then thinking through, again, what is the method that works best for the ongoing creation that's going to be most scalable, that fits with either your current tech stack or fits with the type of resources that you currently have. Training and enablement, super, super important, right? Definitely don't want to skip on the training and enablement. You need to be able to create some sort of training guides to enable these power users on how to navigate the system, right? Because again, going back to not everybody has the same level of comfort using an LMS, technology proficiency in general. So you need to be able to design something that is universal, right? And this could be lots of different examples. You could place a video on their dashboard. Maybe this looks like some sort of introduction on the system, how to navigate, et cetera, how to find, the things that they need to find. This could, if you want something to be a little bit more formal, like if you need to track, like, okay, I saw this power user completed this course and understood, maybe there's some sort of assessment. You could create an intro course, right? Seen lots of clients do something similar. You place that training as learning objects actually in a formal e-learning course shell, and that way you can track it. Consider using a file repository widget as well if you want to provide those more like supplemental resources to the power users. And then they could just pull those on demand, and those could be like step-by-step training guides. Some other ideas for training and enablement could look like if you're using Discover, Coach, and Share, for example, maybe you want to create a channel for power user enablement, and you can create an expert against that channel that is maybe your super admin, right? So if you want that more informal way of enabling and you want to provide that interaction piece where people can ask questions to their peers and or ask questions directly to the expert, your admin, that is a great way to do that if you're currently using Discover, Coach, and Share. The last idea that you could use could just simply be like a frequently asked question page, right? The system, again, is flexible enough where you can create those widget pages. You could create an HTML, use those HTML page widgets and actually input your training guides there as well. So lots of different ways. Think through kind of what works best for you. Again, keeping that audience in mind. And then, of course, the last piece is going to be delegation. You do need some super admins that are responsible for managing the level of access as well as the process, right? Sort of who owns that process, who's ultimately responsible for owning that governance decision or conversation, right? So you want to be able to delegate the responsibility to those incoming power users, as well as setting up sort of that formal channel of communication between your power users and your super admins, right? Because you might have incoming requests from power users that need to be addressed by the super admin in the system, right? And this could be different ideas for this. If your company uses Slack and you want more of that informal channel, you could create a Slack channel where power users can directly ask questions, more of an internal use case. You could also use a generic email. I see this is pretty common, support at your company domain. Maybe you set up an out of office and that has an SLA of when they'll be able to get back to you, something like that. So think through, the delegation piece, and definitely don't skip out on having that formal channel of communication between your power users and between your super admins. All right, so we did a little don'ts for you guys. I'll jump into the do's, and then Josephina will talk to us a little bit about things that you should probably avoid. So do document the rationale for the creation of each power user profile. Can't stress this enough, right? We know that there's influx, there's turnover on teams, we're growing, etc. Whatever the case may be for you guys, it's super important to actually document that, and that is accessible to everybody, to super admins and power users alike. It's super important to define those rules of engagement among power users and super admins, right? Because you're giving them some sort of permission, right? So there needs to be rules of engagement in place that are understood by everybody who's actually going to be having those permissions, right? Another best practice is turn on audit trail reporting. So audit trail is an app. Currently, it's in the legacy reports area. If you were to go run a custom report, it's a type of report that you can actually run. This is going to pick up on all of those administrative actions in the system. So this is important because maybe something happens and your power users accidentally deleted some users or accidentally deleted some training materials, and you need to know what happened, what event happened, when, and by who, right? So audit trail is going to give you that record, that immutable record, where you can actually go back and view what actions were taken and when, right? Like I said, do provide training and enablement. This is super important. If you have a specific objective that these power users have to do, you need to enable them on how to actually navigate the system to be able to achieve that end objective. And then finally, create those unique experiences for them. Not everybody, again, visits the LMS for the same reason. Not everybody has the same objective for the system. So think through the audience, think through their experience, right? Provide an experience that's clean, minimal, and gives them the direct point of need. So I'll pass it over to Josephina. She's going to talk to us a little bit about things that we should try to avoid.
Yes, exactly. So Ashley had a great point to make sure your audit trail reporting is turned on. So you make sure if something is happening in the system and you're not sure, how that may have happened, that's a great place to start. But an even better place to be is in the scenario where you don't have a lot going on that you aren't sure how it happened. And so start by not giving away those delete permissions, since we just don't want to put ourselves in a place where we do have to track something down because something bad happened. So best thing we can do is avoid that. So delete permissions, sometimes it's something just a super admin can do. And only because it is tough sometimes to bring things back that have been deleted, right? So as well, we don't want to create just a one-size-fits-all experience. Our power users are also our stakeholders. We need to make sure that whatever they're doing, they can do it well, they can do it successfully. That way, again, it'll minimize what you have to do and how much you enable people, because that user experience is already, clean and takes less explanation and enablement, right? So in order to get to that sweet spot where, again, people have the right permissions, that experience is clean, and people know what they need to do, a huge part of this is testing. We want to make sure that, there are honestly a few steps to configuring the power user. And it's super important that not only do we make sure that we've identified the right permissions, but we go in, we test things out start to finish to ensure that I am, in fact, able to do what I need to do as, for example, that instructional designer, right? And that fourth piece is that as your LMS changes, as your organization changes, it's bound to happen where you may have to update permissions, update pages, whatnot, update your user structure. It's really important that we keep that line of communication open. That way, everybody is on board when they need to shift perhaps some processes. So that's the biggest pieces of your 4 don'ts. Again, that top one is, I think the most important is make sure maybe hold on to those delete permissions. I feel like it is a scary thing to give those away, but it really always comes back to that Spider-Man quote. Hope you guys take that biggest takeaway from this.
Great. So now we're going to jump into creation. And as you can see, there's lots of different options you can choose from. Think through what works for you guys, as well as what resources do you have, right? If you don't have like a technical resource to be able to do this via API, you might consider doing something through CSV or automation app, right? It's a little bit more configurable. So first and foremost, keep repeatability in mind. Think scalability. Again, going back to those questions. But the first step really is going to be creating the profile. Remember, we only create the profile once and select those permissions so that for some of you guys who may not be as familiar, have not used the app, you don't have to click through each permission for every power user. You do that one time and you associate the profile to that person, right? So it's not just about associating the profile, you also have to associate that level. So they need, remember, we have user, power user, admin. They need to be both the power user. They need to also have that profile that will provide them all of their permissions, right? So Josephina is going to talk to us a little bit about the creation methods. Before that, this is what the interface is actually going to look like when you're going through and creating that profile. Again, revamped interface. We just recently went through an enhancement for this area. You're going to define the profile, right? And then you'll see that there's lots of different areas that you can choose from. These are all the available areas that you can give permissions to, right? Once you choose your area, you can actually define the specific permissions. So if you want edit, view on reports, you can do that. If you want them to only view reports and you do not want them to edit reports, you have that control. You can control that level of granularity.
Awesome. Good stuff. So Now we need to make sure that once we have our power user profile, we have our user then, being promoted to a power user to then receive access to receive that power user profile permissions, and as well the visibility to certain users, courses, etc. So we can do that in many different ways. And if you are starting out, the biggest one is probably going to be just directly through the interface, right? Just hopping into the Power User app, you can go ahead and do everything from there, which is really nice, is that this is now possible with their latest enhancement that you can configure the Power User fully just directly within the app, where the app of the Power Users, right? Where you can go ahead, select the Power User to change their level, place them or assign the proper profile to them, and then continue to assign the visibility. So the next slide will show you just how easy it is to modify the user level. This one in particular will show you how you can still do it within that user management page. It's about changing the level, remembering that we have those 3 levels: user, power user, and super admin, right? So once they're a power user, we can take that step to then assign them the profile, assign them the visibility and whatnot. However, just showing you the few more ways there are to do that promotion, complete this configuration. You can also do what we just saw through a CSV import, which is really nice if you're already managing your users via CSV import, where you can go ahead, upload the username, change their level with that file, and even assign them the profile with the CSV. So just inputting the string of the profile name that you have already created. In this case, just with this import, I can make Ashley the reporting manager. There are some more steps where I do have to then assign the proper users and courses to her, but this is a great starting point. So I think I really like this solution with the automation app. And of course, if you can use this is mostly dependent on your tech stack, your ability to use that automation app, again, based off of if you have that SFTP site available to you. So say you do, this is pretty fantastic because it can let you do that upload even further and all the way kind of through this power user configuration, where not only can I do that initial assignment of making someone a power user, assigning them a certain power user profile, but I can even do the assignment of permissions within this upload. So this one's pretty powerful in the fact that I can go ahead and say, Ashley as the reporting manager has access to this specific branch, to this specific category of courses, all within my automation import. So it's pretty fantastic. And there is always the option of APIs, and Ashley will tell you about that.
Yeah, so the final creation method, as you mentioned, is going to be API. It's going to be a little bit more technically involved. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but this is going to be what you're going to be looking for. It is in the Learn microservice of your API browser. You do need to be a super admin to be able to set this up and to be able to access the API browser. Once you do that, you'll see Power User. I think it actually says PU. That's going to give you the calls that you can make. You're going to be wanting to look for post calls, right? Because we're talking about the creation method. So there's a number of things you can do via API, all of in terms of actually promoting them and or demoting them. Maybe somebody moves out of their position or you have a lateral move. You need to take away a permission. That's okay. That can be done also via API. You can assign those org charts or branches. You can also associate groups as well. Courses, all the content, right? Catalogs. So if you want them to have the permissions of the courses in all of the visible catalogs, that's the way you would do that. Assigning individual users as well. Locations, if you guys are using classroom courses, have a heavy IoT use case. And then finally, categories, which would probably be more applicable to someone like an instructional designer, course editor, analyst who needs to actually have permissions or be able to view create categories, right? Pass it back over to you, Josephina.
Awesome. Good stuff. So fantastic. We just walked through a lot of what it means to configure the power user, from creating that profile with those permissions to then, promoting that user level from user to power user. And in those examples, some of them we were able to go all the way and assign visibility. So if you are new to power users or you are using the interface to fully configure the power users, this is the last step for you. And it is super important. We're not done yet, or we need to assign the visibility. This is fantastic where, in those examples we talked about before, say, if we do have a regional manager who only needs to view their region, this is where, maybe your regions are broken out by branches and you can define just the branch for their region, right? So we have all of these options to go to. So when you have perhaps separate power user profiles, this visibility will impact that power user regardless of the amount of profiles they may have, right? So that will go across the board. I will say course categories are also in there, which has been super beneficial, and you can even trickle down the visibility assignment to locations. So yeah, here is the view from the interface where you can do it directly there. This is the list of everything we just looked at, where you are editing that power user, assigning the visibility to maybe a specific branch, the specific courses, even putting their power user profile there in the background, as we mentioned.
All right. And the last thing we're going to touch on is, as we mentioned previously, the power user experience, right? And when we say experience, we, in Docebo, we're really meaning the pages and menus that you provided them access to, right? So, let's put on our learning experience design framework. And this is kind of going to walk us through the things you should consider. Again, understanding that audience, level of technology proficiency, define the expected outcomes. Again, going back to sort of that governance planning conversation, what do they need to be able to know or do in the system? What are their objectives? From there, this will largely help you create and build out those profiles. Remember, we build the profile one time and associate that to the individual power users. Always important to identify constraints up front so that those can be mitigated. You'll want to create those mock-ups and then go through a series of testing, right? As we mentioned, definitely don't skip out on beta testing, especially if this is new for those people. Again, going back to who is your audience, gather that feedback, right, from that initial user acceptance testing. What went well, what didn't go so well, what can we improve, right? And you're going to want to sort of close that loop, so to speak, right? You're going to want to implement the changes based on the feedback that you've heard. And then, rinse and repeat, right? This isn't just something you can do up front. It's something you can reevaluate on an ongoing basis. So, speaking experience-wise, this is just an example, and Josephina will kind of talk us through what a potential landing page might look like for somebody who could, is potentially a power user.
Awesome. So your landing page will be determined by the permissions that someone has. Obviously, if someone doesn't have access to users, we're not going to give them the ability, this button here that points them there. So this is where we talk about one size does not fit all. So it is super important to make sure that if you have the ability and the bandwidth, make a landing page for your power users. It's going to make their workflow so much simpler by having these simple boxes. And the best part is that with Docebo's custom page functionality, everything you see here are out of the box widgets, no coding required. It's so simple to make a landing page for your power users that it's hard to not, provide that customer experience for them. So we're really encouraging you to do so using buttons like this, where it's very evident where I need to go, what I need to do, and I don't have to worry about digging into that admin gear to do it. So this is going to be, I think, the best advantage you have when you need to control the experience, helping them do what they need to by either providing call to action and further communication here, assisting them in, steps that they need to take, where they need to go for what. What you see below those three buttons are just additional out of the box widgets. Maybe you have some graphics in there. Maybe you have a task list widget prompting them to take some kind of action. The task list widget is really good for power users that may need to take some kind of action relating, to many different things, whether it be overdue courses or, pending users that need to be approved. Your workflow could really be helped through the use of the task list widget, which again does a great job of prompting action. So I think the task list widget is something to consider. not only with these call to action buttons, with the custom content box widgets.
Yeah, I love that custom content box. It's so easy. You don't need any coding experience. If you have a super agile team and that you don't have an entire UX team that is going to help you build out sort of the UX layout and elements, you don't need to, right? There's so many tools available. Like Josephina said, it's drag and drop these widgets. There's options for creating formats, all done in the UI. I will say Canva is another excellent tool to use, free for graphic design. You don't need to be a graphic designer to be able to use it. So again, if you're working with a super agile team, the Pages it really is a very configurable way to create those unique experiences that end up looking really, really sharp and are actually extremely functional downstream. All right. So that's all we have for you guys today. I would love to jump into some of the Q&A.
Amazing. Thank you guys both so much. I just wanted to quick shout out that this session is being recorded and will be shared via email with everybody on the call today, as well as those who weren't able to attend. Additionally, following that email that's sent out tomorrow, it will be available in Docebo University as well. So you'll be able to go back and review as much as you would like. We'll hop into a few questions right now. One question that had come up in the Q&A, and please feel free to use the Q&A section within your Zoom to ask questions. There was an attendee who was curious, is there a limit to the number of profiles that you can assign to a single power user?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. So I've actually tested this a couple times. I think I've gotten up to like 10 profiles I was able to associate. I would say a general rule of thumb, the best practice would be don't create more than probably five or six, right? If you need to create more than that, then you need to go back to the governance planning phase, right? To decide, do you really need that many, right? So again, think through the persona wise. Again, if you need more than that, probably need to reconsider and go back to step one of the planning phase of documenting why do we need that? Yeah, that's a great question.
Great. Another one that was just off the end of the presentation there. What was the graphic design program that you just mentioned that you did not need a graphic designer to use?
Yeah, it's called Canva. Canva.com. Great. I love that tool. I tell all my clients about that tool.
Another question is, again, on the last slide that we saw there, on your power user landing page, what was the widget that was used for that graph?
So that's the graph is pretty sure the activity overview widget that just shows sessions and enrollments. That was the graph. Now the one on the right that shows overdue, that was a task list widget, and you have a lot of different tasks to choose from. That one in particular just had one task, and it was overdue course task. And yeah. I believe also someone, asked, is there a widget that shows courses that are pending expiration, not just overdue? We have that widget, but it's just for the end user rather than a power user. I will say notifications and course enrollment date reports are your friend when you want to stay on top of those pending expirations before they do hit that expiration. I mean, yeah, it's a general tip, not just power user related.
Yeah. And one cool little thing about our page widgets too is some of them have these toggle options where you can toggle on certain views. So in a way, you could almost use those like separate widgets. So like activity overview could toggle on like sessions and then maybe just overview in general. And it's the same widget, but you're toggling on a different view. So in that sense, you really do have a lot of flexibility there.
Absolutely. Another question, can the API calls being provided be modified to be used for learners as well, such as assigning courses or possibly moving branches?
Yeah. There are API calls for that. It's not the ones we listed. The ones we listed were specifically for power users, but definitely that's within our API browser, in that, at least for users, it'd be that manage subset of calls.
Great.
Yeah, you'll probably find a lot of good calls in the learn microservice and or the manage microservice. Those are going to be the two most common. And again, you do need to be a super admin, and there is a knowledge base on the website, success tab, knowledge base, great resource.
So
Great.
there is, I think, one of the first questions that came up from Marianne was that she wanted to see the power user profiles that someone may have assigned quite easily. And so right now, there's not a report that you can pull from the interface to see that. So you are having to dig into the power user to see, or that, through the power user app, see what profiles they have. You may be able to get this information via API, but worth looking into. Right now with the interface, you do have to jump into that power user individually to see all the profiles that are assigned.
Great. The question here from Karen, she's asked, how do multiple profiles resolve conflicts? Like one profile gives delete and the other doesn't.
You want to take that one, Josephina? I think we were testing this last night. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think the biggest benefit of having this multiple profile, I think someone alluded to, like I need a lot of different profiles because everybody has such different needs. So I think a huge benefit of having multiple profiles is that you can really can some things together and assign maybe 5 profiles that will include permissions of, specific areas. So I think that's a big benefit, if that makes sense, of having the different profiles. Definitely, if one profile has delete permissions versus one does not, like the power user will end up having those delete permissions. They won't counteract each other. So that's where, it's worth analyzing that carefully of what permissions are we adding. And perhaps that delete permission, if you do choose to add that, right, maybe gets included in just naming, I think, that power user profile a little carefully of saying, this is that extra level of administration only assigned to a subset of people.
Yeah. I would say also consider the area of the platform that you're giving the delete permission, right? So if you give delete in one area, but not the other, they'll only have the delete in the area that you've specified, right? So in that sense, it won't like cross wires and then give them delete for another area. It's only going to give them that permission for the specific area that you've defined in the profile.
Great. Another question here, can power users create and or modify other power users?
Not yet.
Good. Yeah, good answer. Not yet. They cannot, more of like a permission security thing. They can only edit, if they can create new users, they can edit another user, but they can't actually edit another power user.
And additionally, somebody's asking, can I easily make managers as part of my teams a power user as well?
So to do that, we do need to, let's see, you do have to go through that configuration step of changing their user level, assigning them a certain branch or group, and then assigning them a certain subset of courses, as well as that power user profile, which a lot of times we just use a power user profile called manager. So regardless if it's manager that you're using in my teams, they do have to go through that same configuration cycle of setting up that power user. Ashley, I don't know if you have something to add there.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, consider that managers do have a little bit of elevated permissions inherent in the fact that they're a manager as part of my teams, right? Because they can go to the My Teams page, they can drill down and view their team, they can view a user personal summary. So a manager inherently already has some very basic reporting capabilities on the people they oversee directly, right? If you need them to have more granular level, pull custom reports, create custom reports, for example, that would be a reason to also create a profile and designate them as a power user, right? So you'll want to consider what level of granularity they will need, because a typical manager, when we think of that, we tend to think of reporting.
Jeremy's asked here, will power users be able to impersonate users?
I don't know that they can now, but I'm pretty sure that is on the roadmap to allow power users to impersonate others. You can impersonate, you as a super admin can impersonate power users, but I think that's coming, Jeremy.
Great. Jeanette also asks, are there any plans to allow power users the ability to approve pending users once they confirm their email?
That I don't know. That might be a roadmap item that is going to be planned for 2021, but need to confirm. Anything related to functionality not yet existing, we would probably need to confirm with the product team first. I will say though, since this area is ripe for enhancement, I will make the plug for the ideas portal. These are great ideas. If you guys have not already, please do add those to our ideas portal. You need to be a super admin to access that. It's in the communication center, right? So all of these, if you want to see enhancements or functionality that doesn't quite exist yet, absolutely add those because the product team is actively reviewing those. And happy to say, we've actually ended up developing a lot of those really popular ideas. For example, the one about associating multiple profiles to a single user. So I would say stay tuned for the roadmap and definitely add those enhancements to our ideas portal.
Perfect. So a little step back here. So Caesar's actually just asked, where is the My Team section? Maybe that's just sort of a simple overview that we can kind of help to provide that information just for where they can access My Teams.
Yeah. So if I'm a manager and I've been designated as a manager, right? I would access my team members on the My Teams page, right? My Teams is a built-in page in Docebo, built-in meaning you can associate that to a profile. Now, if I associate that built-in page to let's say a generic menu, it's only going to expose the My Teams page for anyone who has been designated a manager. When we think of the first steps, like that's how an actual manager would access that page. The first thing, if we kind of take a step back, the first thing you'll want to do is define those manager types, which you actually do so from the user management area. So admin gear users, you see those calls to action buttons up top. On one of them, there'll be a drop down. That's where you define your manager types. So that will be part of, similar to those sort of governance conversations around power user profiles. You could apply a similar governance framework to how you'll consider what manager types you'll want to have in the system. Yeah, great question.
Additionally, is there any way to get guidance on the APIs that we've been mentioning? Do the API callouts that you mentioned automate those functions for new users?
For like new users who are not power users?
I think so, yeah.
Probably. We do have that API knowledge base. So additionally, we have that help desk if you have questions, et cetera, right? In terms of automating for user creation, yes, you can do that as well. I would explore the manage microservice. I think it's under users and or org charts is going to be another good one to look up. But yes, if you want to go the route of automating largely the creation as well as updating, absolutely you can do that via API.
Great. And we'll take maybe two more questions and then sort of call it a day for today. The question that I've got here is, what does it mean to assign a catalog to a power user?
Yeah, good question. So a catalog is going to be a container of courses and learning plans, right? So if you want, instead of doing each individual course, because that could be a lot, maybe you have multiple different catalogs and within each catalog, you have multiple different courses. If I assign a catalog to that power user, it means they'll have visibility and they can apply those permissions to any content that's inside those visible catalogs. More scalable way, I would say, of assigning the content piece of it, if catalogs is something that you use heavily in your use case.
Great. Well, Ashley, Josephina, thank you both so much for joining us today. I hope everybody on the call is walking away. And please make sure that you register. We're going to kind of almost extend this with real world use cases in our next session on December 17th, all about bringing these beautiful learning platforms to life. We'll be joined by a panel of Docebo customers, including Netflix, Acoustic, and Wilson HCG. Please hop over to inspire2020.docebo.com to register for that. And for all of you customers on the call, please submit for the Docebo, the Road to Inspire Learning Awards. Again, head to the website. You can see the categories there. There are 5 categories that you can submit. And I really, all of us welcome the opportunity to read through your success. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Ashley, Josephina, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Have a great one.